For that, hello everybody. What we'll do today is we'll go through the topics which are listed on the slide over here. We'll first of all try to understand an overview of what is cross-platform mobile application development about. We'll go through understanding the mobile application, how is it different than traditional web application development, and we'll go through various ways of developing mobile applications, be it cross-platform, be it native, be it hybrid. The way I would define cross-platform mobile application development is, it's a process of developing applications for various mobile platforms using a common source code with little or no change to the common source. In this presentation, we'll focus on comparing two frameworks, which are the leaders in solving the cross-platform mobile application development problem, namely being PhoneGap and Titanium Mobile. So before we go towards understanding what is Titanium Mobile, let's understand how our mobile application is different than what the world is used to developing. Now, the main reason for people to move their applications from or replicate their applications from web applications to mobile applications is to reach the ever-growing number of mobile users. Not only that these users are ever-growing, they are more frequent users. They will use the applications, they use the services multiple times in a day, and since the mobile phone is handy, it's always good to be present very close to the actual consumer. Now let's try to understand how a mobile application is different than a traditional web application. Now let's say if a web application provides some X amount of features to its end users, a mobile application for the same service will not provide X. It will provide a subset of X. There are various reasons for this. Firstly, the user wants to use the application on the go. So he will only use the features which are most important to him. Secondly, the devices which we have, the mobile phones, the smartphones, they have a limited size and they are limited screen size. The user would only want to do what he wants to do most. And the user would get back to his desktop and go on a browser to do more complex things. This is the nature of how mobile applications have been used. The second thing is about tablets. Now with the advent of tablets, that scenario has changed a bit. A tablet would provide almost the same amount of features as a traditional web application. So that's a different area itself. Also understand that a mobile user would be on a mobile application for only a couple of minutes, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, and that's it. But a tablet user would be on a tablet for half an hour to 2 hours. And that's what defines the difference in quality between mobile applications and tablet applications. The third thing is, how do people interact with this new age smartphone or tablet applications? Traditionally, we used to use our keyboard and mouse to interact with them. Now it's touch, there's accelerometer, you can fill the mobile phones or tablets. There's also compass which helps you, interact with your applications. Here I'll take an example of a very popular application called as Layar Application. It's an augmented reality application, which is like think about it as in Google local search, but you're looking at it through a camera. So what you see over here is you're looking at the world through the camera, and you're using the GPS and the compass to know where you're looking, and then you're putting points of interest on top of the image. So it's a very interesting way of interacting with this application, not the traditional way of using keyboard and mouse. Going forward, one thing which is very important about mobile applications is many applications tend to be location aware, and they do help the user a lot because they're very accurate in terms of which location they are based on. Gone are the days when people have to use GPS navigation devices in their cars. You can just use your Android or iPhone to do the same. Also, the mobile phones, they're getting more and more useful with the number of sensors which they are having. A mobile phone will have a camera, it will have a voice, and more or less NFC is becoming a reality. There are a couple of Android phones which has this new technology called as NFC, near field communication. This technology will turn your mobile phones not only into a credit card an access card, or even a business card exchanger. That's a very interesting thing which is coming up. So in future also you will see more and more technologies, more and more sensors being added to the mobile applications, more mobile devices. Let's take an example of how mobile applications tend to work and how different mobile applications can interact with each other. Let's say my goal is to go to Best Buy to buy a router, and I want to buy the router at the best price. Now I go to the store, I take out my application, which tells me whether this is the best price or not. I open my camera and I scan the barcode. The application recognizes my product, goes online, figures out whether this is the best price. If it is not the best price, the application can open the navigator to tell me which store has the best price. And then I can use the navigator to reach over there. In the future, when NFC becomes a reality, I can even pay for that using my cell phone. So it's a quite interesting world of how mobile applications tend to interact with each other. Last but not the least is this important feature of notification. Now all of us love, people who have been using software since early days love Outlook for a simple reason that it has got notifications. When the email comes, I get notified. When there's a calendar request, meeting, I get notified. The same thing applies to mobile phones, and it's much more handy because you're carrying your phone everywhere. Now you can be notified about your emails, or you can be notified about a tweet or a Facebook activity, or in real world, in business, if there's a workflow you are part of, you need to approve or disapprove some things. And if the company has the workflow available on the mobile phone as an application, you can respond to that workflow from anywhere, being more efficient. You don't have to be on a desktop. So push notification is one of the very important features of mobile application. Now, while all this seems very interesting, there are certain challenges with building mobile applications. And I'm going to walk you through a few of them. The first and foremost challenge which is there, which you all know, and that's why we are all gathered over here, is the OS fragmentation. Now, with different kinds of OS coming, iPhone, Android, BlackBerry, Palm, Windows 7 being on the horizon, things look difficult for a company who wants to reach mobile users on all these platforms. And it's become a major headache for people to actually reach mobile users on all the platforms. With different platforms comes different teams and different products, which adds to further headache. Multiple teams obviously means more headache on project management, risk management, delivery to market, dependencies, things like that. It also has more headache on the product management because each of these applications is a product on a different platform. One may say that they have to behave exactly the same, but all these devices are different. The product manager has to lay out what will work in which manner on which OS. So you'll have different specs for these different kind of platforms, which is again an added overhead on the management. Going forward, let's talk about the uniform user experience. But now, almost everybody who is tech savvy has a smartphone and has a laptop. And these are two platforms we're talking about. Tablets are getting more and more favorite. So I'm seeing more and more people having a smartphone and tablet as well. And some people tend to have them of different OS. Let's say I might have an Android phone and I might have an iPad tablet. Or I might just throw away my Android phone and go for an iPhone, or throw my iPhone away and go for Android. The whole thing is, irrespective of what mobile platform the user is using, he needs to quickly be able to adapt to any other OS. So if I'm launching an application on different platforms, the application user should be able to seamlessly use it without any learning curve. And that's where the user experience comes into the picture. That's one key thing. Further thing is, the further headache which comes with different OS is that and different devices is that different OS have different capabilities and different device features. Let's take for example, in this whole matrix, which is a PhoneGap matrix of what is supported on which platform and what is not supported. The geolocation is the only line which is supported on the platforms. Whereas if you look at camera or compass, you will see that Palm platform doesn't support it. It may not support it because maybe the hardware doesn't have it, or maybe the OS is not exposing it via some APIs. So that's why a product manager has to spec out a product for each platform, keeping into mind these limitations. Now, having said about the challenges, let's talk about how we can develop mobile applications. There are different ways to develop mobile applications. There's a native mobile application way, which is like get an iPhone team, get an Android team, get a BlackBerry team, and let them make native Android projects. Or you can go for a single team, build applications for all the products, all the platforms, which is cross-platform mobile applications. And surprisingly enough, there's a third way of building applications, which is called as hybrid. You will face certain situations where the application can be done through cross-platform mobile application development methodology, but there still needs to be some native components added to it. So the application is partly native and it's partly cross-platform. And that's what I call as the hybrid method. Now, an important decision for any company is how to choose upfront which way to follow. A company will have a choice whether to invest more money and more time into getting more teams to build native applications, looking at the strengths of native applications, or if their needs are not as such that they need the strength of native application, they can go with cross-platform application to save both cost and time. Now here are a few guidelines. They are not rock solid, but here are a few guidelines why you should consider native over non-native. If your application requires high performance, absolute high performance, some processing powers, some background service running, doing something, my advice is you should go for native application. If your application requires heavy use of OS and device features, for example, my application is a VoIP application. It needs Android service running in the background to basically able to receive a call or send out a call. Well, I would go for a native application because I'm relying on something which is Android service over there or a particular device feature over there. Similarly, for products like Dropbox or SugarSync, which have this complex network communication for syncing the files, you should go for native application development, where you have very complex communication between server and the client, which is much more complex than the traditional RESTful APIs. Furthermore, one more example of why I would suggest a native application is when your application requires canvas-based drawing. For example, if you're writing a PDF writer or Office application, or it's a game, or it's an application which is an authoring tool like Photoshop, you need to draw on a canvas. This is currently not so efficient going cross-platform, and it requires a high-performance rendering on canvas to go to, so you should go for native. And lastly, if you only want to support, let's say, two platforms, that like you imagine has decided that you only want to support Android and iOS, looking at the fact that they have the maximum number of end users, it does make sense to go native in that sense. But if you're supporting many platforms, more than those two, then understand the overhead is going to be far more than the benefit. In the next slide, I'll talk about cross-platform mobile applications and when to go for it. Now, what I've really done is just reverse the when to and when not to. So if my application is not very, very performance-centric, then yes, cross-platform makes sense because cross-platform uses is a higher level programming way. It will have different layers, so it may not tend to be as performant as a native application. An important thing over here is why are you building the mobile applications? You do have a web application, and now you want to reach your mobile application world, and your mobile application more or less mimics the functionality of the web application, adding few device features, let's say GPS, local store, compass, I don't know, something of that sort. Then it makes more sense for you to go cross-platform way. If your server communication is standard RESTful way, sure, go this way. If your application UI is much more simpler, which has buttons, text boxes, scrolls, just typical UI which you can say, cross-platform suffices that need. Especially you should think about cross-platform when you have many, many platforms. Also, when the time to market is very critical and saving cost is very important, you should definitely give a very thorough thought on adopting cross-platform mobile application development methodology. Going forward, I'll talk about the third way of developing applications, which is hybrid mobile applications. Now, before I talk about when to go for hybrid, let's understand why to go for hybrid. And when the world is just being introduced to cross-platform development, how come hybrid has come so early? That's a question which everybody would have. Think about applications like Dropbox, SugarSync, and all these things. These applications are typically meant to share files across desktop, mobile phones, from the cloud, things like this. Now, if you can think about it, all these applications, let's say whether they're on iPhone, Android, or BlackBerry, the UI would be more or less the same. Because all you say is, I want to share this folder, or I want to sync this folder. Simple as that. However, the other part of the application, which is about the complex sync operation, which is trying to figure out whether a file has changed on a local machine, local device, or a remote device, trying to figure out what has changed, trying to communicate that change, trying to apply that change, and making sure everything is fine. It's a very complex operation. Now, what I would say over here is, you can develop the UI using cross-platform methodology, and you can develop this native component, which is a very heavyweight component of syncing using native application, native languages. And then you can glue these two parts together. That's why I say a hybrid way is going partly cross-platform and going partly native way. So when do we go for hybrid mobile applications? When the UI is fairly simple, but the backend is fairly complex. And you do need quite a few platforms. Maybe you need all the platforms, or you need 3 or 4 platforms. Just think about this, because anything which is common will save you cost. As an example of this, there's a service called a ShareFile, which uses something called as PhoneGap plugin, which I'll talk later. And I have a use case of this. So I'll talk about hybrid mobile applications near the end of the presentation. So the next topic I'm going to talk about is actually cross-platform mobile application development strategies. So Hemant, if there's any burning question you want to let me know about, please do so.
Yeah, right. There's no burning question right now, so you should keep going on. I'll inject if there's anything that particularly needs to be addressed.
Sure. Thank you. So there are typically 2 ways to go about over here. One thing is to figure out what is a common platform. So if I have got iOS, Android, BlackBerry, Symbian, webOS, we need to figure out what is the common platform which is available on all this OS and try to build on top of that platform. That's the example of PhoneGap. PhoneGap is based using this way. The second thing is mapping to native, in which you have a common API which maps to native code. Now, I'll first of all go through common platform approach. Let's understand what is a common platform approach. All the new smartphones which have come in the market now have a modern browsers, which have better support for HTML5 and CSS3 specs. Even so, they're much better than what desktop browsers provide. So if you see over here, all these mobile OS, except Windows 7, they're all WebKit based. Now, with all these modern browsers coming to OS platform, all these modern OS provide a way to show web pages as a part of a screen. So if your application has a number of screens, let's say there's a screen which shows a list, there's a screen which shows a picture gallery, there's also a screen which is available which can show a web page. And this is called as WebView. So you can have, let's say, your about box or about us page of application, screen of application, actually just show a web page. Simple as that. That's the new capability which all these platforms are giving. Surprisingly enough, all these browser engines, most common being WebKit, they support the JavaScript in the WebView talking to the native code and back. So here's an example of that. The example is that I write I have got a WebView and I basically am showing a HTML page which has Google Maps into it. This Google Maps load from Google, and this Google Maps now talks to the native Android code using Java, or it talks to native iOS code using Objective-C, and it asks the native code that give me the GPS location. And when the GPS location is given back from the native code, the Google Maps will center around that particular GPS location. So that's an example of how things work. So this is a combination of HTML JavaScript applications working in close conjunction with native code. With this, the possibilities are limitless. The reason I say this because you can now expose all the native features of the device using JavaScript. So you can expose camera, you can expose accelerometer, GPS, or any other phone sensors. So instead of just building a browser-based application, you can augment the application with more phone features. GPS is just being one of them. I could build an application which can take a photograph. So this application is a JavaScript application which takes a photograph, calling a native camera code, and then uploads the photograph on Flickr or on Facebook without you knowing Android code or Objective-C code for iOS. Let's take an example on the documentation part of the PhoneGap over here. On the left-hand side, you will see the API reference. You can see different references for different kind of features like accelerometer, camera, compass, device, file, geolocation, and so forth. Let's look at a small code example of PhoneGap. So when you use PhoneGap, your HTML or JavaScript code can just call navigator.camera.getPicture, and it will pass two callback methods to this thing. In the callback method of success, when everything is going good, you can actually get the actual bytes of the images itself, and you can show them on the screen, or you can upload them to Flickr or Facebook. So it's very simple. I'm just using some JavaScript to do so. Understand in this case, the UI is HTML JavaScript, and any native code is exposed by some other JavaScript provided by PhoneGap. The next approach is mapping to native. This approach, you need to think a bit more to understand it. Think about that we are choosing a common language, say JavaScript, and we will develop all our applications in JavaScript. But the way it's different than PhoneGap is when you call a JavaScript code, say a code to create a window or a code to create a dialog box, you are actually passing the call to the native code. So it will actually show Android window for Android. It will show a UI view for iPhone, things like that. So typically there are two different parts over here. One part is the UI development, second part is the phone features. So the Titanium prefers to go native UI instead of HTML CSS, and the phone features which are exposed are more or less like PhoneGap. But the key difference here over here compared to the common platform approach of PhoneGap is that the applications are native. Everything about the application is native instead of HTML5 or CSS. And this is more or less I'm talking about Titanium more than anything else. So think about this. You've got two API sets, one for the UI and another API set for the phone features, like accessing the camera or GPS. And everything which you see, the application, is in native look and feel. I'll show you some screens in a couple of slides down to make this understanding more crisp. So if I look at an example of Titanium source code, you can see that I'm writing a JavaScript which says titanium.ui.create window, and I'm saying that I want to create a window in Titanium JavaScript. What it actually does is it actually passes the control to Android to show an Android window, and passes the control to iPhone in case of iPhone, showing the UI view. So you'll always see a native view over here. But what I see with Titanium kind of framework is more of an issue than an advantage. The best advantage is definitely that you will have a native application, but the issue which I see is that you will have a minimum API set because iPhone and Android do not have the common widgets. So let's say iPhone has a widget which is not there in Android. What do you do about it? You won't have it. Well, Titanium doesn't actually do that. What it does is it does provide Android-specific widgets and iOS-specific widgets. But that leads to more fragmentation. This is one aspect of this approach which I do not really enjoy so much. So when we talk about these two approaches, what are the frameworks which are available? For common platform, as I told you, it's PhoneGap. For mapping to native, primarily I'm focusing on Titanium Mobile. And there's one more framework called Roads Mobile. Let me be very frank, I'm not an expert on Roads Mobile, so I'll keep the questions to Titanium Mobile. Here are screens which will let you know what I mean by difference in PhoneGap and Titanium Mobile. Look at the PhoneGap screen. It's a cool looking mobile UI screen. And if you look at, which is built in the HTML5 and CSS, when you look at Titanium Mobile, it's a native iPhone screen. You can totally recognize it. The search bar is native, the buttons are native, the list view is native. This is what I mean by Titanium Mobile application being native. In case of PhoneGap, I can build any kind of UI on any kind of application because I'm building them in HTML and JavaScript. So it's totally a different technology. On the next screen, I'm going to show Android screens. So if you look at PhoneGap on Android, it looks very similar to what it looked on iPhone. Now there could be debate about this, that people prefer native look and feel and so and so. You can of course achieve native look and feel by changing the CSS for different platforms. But the whole idea over here is that the UI is on different technology. So it's not tied down to the actual OS. So the UI fragmentation has now reduced a lot. On the other side, Titanium Mobile application on Android looks chunky like it is on Android with this very thick tab boxes, orange outline text boxes, and so forth. So this is the main difference between the two approaches. Before I go to the next topic, which is actually doing a deep dive into PhoneGap, I'll just pause for a minute. And Hemant, if there's anything, let me know.
Yeah, so Rohit, your pace is pretty good, and I don't see any questions here that weren't taken right now. So we'll keep the general questions toward the end, but there's nothing specific on either of these things you're talking about. So I think it is good for you to carry on.
Sure, thank you. So when we talk about PhoneGap, the best thing about PhoneGap is that PhoneGap supports 6 platforms, almost 6 platforms, because Windows support is coming very soon, which is excellent for any company which wants to develop mobile applications. Titanium Mobile, on the other hand, only supports 2 platforms, which is Android and iOS. The support for BlackBerry is coming, but that will further fragment Titanium. But that's the main advantage of going PhoneGap. It's got support for 6 platforms with the same code base. The PhoneGap, I like it better because it is standard space and extended. When I say standard space, it is HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, which are the standards. And then there's a library of PhoneGap exposing the phone functionality, which is what I say is extended. So how does PhoneGap really work? So the idea is very simple. First of all, understand PhoneGap is a library. It is not an IDE or development environment. PhoneGap is an open source library, which is free of cost. What you do is you create different projects. You create an Xcode project for iOS. You create an Eclipse project for Android, another Eclipse project for BlackBerry, one Palm project using Palm's own IDE. So you do create all these projects separately, and then you inject PhoneGap into it so as to allow all these applications to run HTML, JavaScript, and PhoneGap. That's the whole idea. At the end, you expose the same installer. For Android, it's APK, which you put on market. For iOS, it is IPK, which you again put on the App Store. Similar things. So the thing of bundling remains the same. Just that during development process, you will inject a framework which lets you run HTML JavaScript into these applications. But when you're using PhoneGap, you need to be aware of certain things. And these are not because of the PhoneGap limitations, but these are because of the device and OS limitations. This is about the PhoneGap features, the segmentation, the fragmentation, what works on what device, what doesn't work on what device, things like that. So this is the same thing which I showed you a couple of slides back.
Okay, Rohit, can you clarify one question here on the ID itself? Is ID native and can use PhoneGap? I'm not sure that was clear to the people.
Sure. So for that, I'll basically go to the next slide, which is called as PhoneGap Prerequisite slide. Okay. So in this case, what I want to say is, if a developer wants to use PhoneGap, he needs to know how to write Hello World application in Android, iOS, BlackBerry, webOS. What I mean by Hello World application is that the developer needs to be acquainted with the actual platform. I can't say that, get any random developer and ask him to create applications next day. He needs to know a bit of this platform, not too much, but a bit of this platform. He needs to know how to use Eclipse IDE for Android, how to use Xcode for iOS, because he'll be creating applications in that particular manner. So PhoneGap has no ID as such. It is just a framework. If I would like to show you something, it would be over here. This is an Eclipse project of PhoneGap. It is an Android project, but you will see that where I'm pointing, I have HTML files and JavaScript files. So I'm using Eclipse IDE for developing PhoneGap application for Android. So the way it works out is you will need to have different repositories for each platform. So you will have a repository for iOS, Android, BlackBerry, webOS, and then you will have a common repository for the HTML JavaScript code. And that code you will use in all of your different projects. Does that answer my question?
Yes, I think it did. Yeah.
Okay. So, but the PhoneGap developer needs to be an expert into HTML and JavaScript, or frameworks like Git. He needs to understand how to use frameworks like jQuery, Scriptaculous, Prototype, things like that. Now here's a screen of how the PhoneGap application looks on iOS. You can see it looks pretty nice, and it's using a framework called as jQuery Mobile to show iPhone, to show the application over here.
But there's one additional clarification question someone is asking, and I think it's important we take it right here, which is based on what you said, does the developer need to know all or at least one of the development flows for one of the platforms? Or do they need to know all of them for Android, for iOS, for BlackBerry?
Well, I would prefer that, but even if the developer does not know about all the platforms, PhoneGap has enough documentation to get anybody started on any platform.
Okay.
But it's good to know something about each platform, because you are going to use the build process of each platform to release the actual installer.
Okay.
So that's how it is.
Okay. That's good. Thanks.
So I'll try to go a bit faster because I'm losing some time over here. What are the challenges and advantages of going PhoneGap way? Well, HTML-based UI is the biggest challenge for PhoneGap because the UI is reaching where it needs to reach for mobile application. For example, for framework like jQuery Mobile, it's almost there, but maybe I'll wait for a release to go production with jQuery Mobile. And that's the biggest advantage also, because I'm not now tied down to any of the mobile OS for the UI. So the UI fragmentation has reduced a lot. The same UI which you use for a portal, let's say you're using the Ajax UI for the portal, you can use the same UI for mobile applications. Maybe use a different CSS to show the application in a different manner. What you need to know is you need to look out for promising frameworks like Git or jQuery Mobile or JQ Touch, things like that. But that's a different topic altogether. That's about building mobile web applications. I'll quickly move towards Titanium. So Titanium is a framework from Accelerator, and it has two parts. One is called as Titanium Desktop, and one is called as Titanium Mobile. I'll be focusing on Titanium Mobile only. So Titanium again is open source under Apache license, and there's another version which is paid, in which you get different modules like commerce modules, PayPal integration, communication modules with some chat integration, analytics model, and media models. So there are two options for going Titanium route. I'm not only cover about the open source option of Titanium. Now the idea of Titanium is that you will use JavaScript to write your code, and this code will be interpreted by interpreter, and it will forward this calls to the native code. That's how it's going to be. So because of this, you don't need to learn Objective-C to write our application. You don't need to learn Java or Android APIs to develop Android application. But at the end, you will get a native application. That's the strength of Titanium Mobile. So Titanium JavaScript, or the application which you write, uses JavaScript, and it also uses the Titanium APIs. It runs on a WebKit JavaScript core interpreter on iPhone and forwards the call to iPhone native. And it runs on Mozilla Rhino on Android and forwards the call to Android native. That's how things work with Titanium. This is an example of this is the architecture of Titanium. I'll only focus on the Titanium mobile side. Here what you have is you have a UI API which talks about creating windows, dialog boxes, buttons, and you have a phone API. The phone API is very much similar to PhoneGap, exposing the camera, the local store, database, things like that. And then you have got this bridge between JavaScript to the native world. What do you require to develop Titanium applications? Well, you still need to be acquainted a little bit with Android and iOS programming, but in this case, the good part is Titanium does provide you an IDE. But the IDE is to create the project, not to modify it. So you still need to use a text IDE to edit the JavaScript code which you write. That is how it is. What you really require is to know JavaScript over here. Just to show you quickly, how does the IDE look like, which will give you a better feel. This is how the IDE looks like for Titanium. You can see a project over here, and you can see dashboard, edit, where I have information about the project, and test package. Here, I can directly run the project as Android project or iPhone project. The packaging happens within the Titanium IDE, but there is no place where you can edit the JavaScript files for Titanium. This is how a screen looks like in Titanium. So this is the same application which I wrote using JavaScript, Titanium JavaScript, and it looks like this on iPhone, which is native iPhone look. When I go towards Android, the same application looks different. It looks more Android specific. And that's the beauty of Titanium. The applications are native. So the challenges and advantages of Titanium are that being native is the biggest strength of Titanium. At the same time, the limited cross-platform API is a weakness, because the common code between Android and the common features between Android and iOS, especially around the UI, will be less. Both Android and iOS won't have the common widgets. Some will have less, some will have more. So you'll always have to do with common thing. Although Titanium does provide us with, Android-specific APIs and iOS-specific APIs. But what I feel is this adds to the fragmentation in code. So there's an API in Titanium which allows you to run Android service. But then my code would look like if Android run the service and if iOS run something else. It's the same fragmentation which we faced in JavaScript a couple of years back. I'll quickly move towards native mobile application development. So what do you need when you develop applications in native way? You need experts for each and every platform to develop the applications. You need them to have experience on how to deploy them to the market. So the same thing is required for cross-platform also. The QA needs to know how to automate things on different devices and things like that. And one thing is common across all the things is if you're writing the application first time, if you're writing the mobile application first time, you do need to plan for risk upfront, because this is a totally different arena. Let's move to hybrid mobile application development. Quickly covering up the part if you want to create a hybrid application which has some part common, let's say the UI is common, you develop it using HTML and JavaScript. And the part which is very complex and native, you develop it using Java or Objective-C or C++. And then you use a framework like PhoneGap to glue these two parts together. This is how you basically work across hybrid application development. ShareFile is one such company which uses PhoneGap to do this, to do a hybrid application development. So they developed the UI in HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript, and then they had native Android and iOS components to do the syncing of files. So you can read about this later on your own time. Lastly, reaching the comparison part. So when I compare these two frameworks, Titanium has the advantage that it gives us native applications, which is very nice. PhoneGap gives us mobile web application, that's what I would say, which can use native features. In Titanium, the API is more proprietary because even the UI code is proprietary to Titanium. In case of PhoneGap, the API is less proprietary because for the UI, I'll be sticking to HTML5 and JavaScript. And only to access the phone features, I'll use PhoneGap APIs. Titanium UI, the UI has limitations because you will only get few components which are common across the platform. In PhoneGap, since it's HTML5 and JavaScript, the UI possibilities are unlimited. Titanium, the UI could be fast. PhoneGap, the UI could be slow, but you can obviously work around this problem. Much better user experience because the native UI in Titanium, user experience will get better as the JavaScript frameworks, they get better. Portal code cannot be reused in Titanium Mobile, whereas portal code can be reused in PhoneGap with different CSS. In both Titanium and PhoneGap, extensions are possible, but I found writing extensions in PhoneGap is a breeze. Titanium also supports HTML and JavaScript route, but it has very limited functionality and is not the right way to go. This is my overall comparison of these two frameworks. And my final conclusion on this topic would be that WebKit seems to be the next virtual machine. It will probably go where Java could not go. Java came as a virtual machine for all the platforms, but Java could only reach the desktop world. Java could not reach the mobile world. iOS does not support Java. webOS does not support Java. So probably WebKit could be the next virtual machine, so-called, across all the platforms. Obviously, Windows 7 Phone will have some other framework, which is ISAM based, but with the specs, everything would be a platform. HTML5 and CSS3 and JavaScript is the future, everybody knows that, but they're not ready just yet. So you can still use HTML4 and CSS2 and JavaScript to write your applications. That will be more than sufficient to write what you typically want to write. If you want to do something much more jazzy than that, then you need to just wait a bit more longer for these standards to evolve. HTML5 and CSS3 and JavaScript are helping to listen to fragmentation across mobile platforms, at least when the UI is concerned. And that's the benefit. And HTML5 will more or less compete with native components going forward. That's the reality. In fact, in coming years, don't be surprised if you see more and more HTML5 based application coming on mobile phones. So Hemant, that concludes my presentation. Over to you.
Yes, thanks, Rohit. Excellent presentation. Let's switch gears here, audience. So Rohit went through a quick perspective on cross-mobile platform, and I know some of the questions I'm already holding in the back pocket here that I wanted to take at the end, and let me bring up my screen. So what we'll do right now is all of you can reflect upon the content Rohit just went through and keep adding more of your questions on the Q&A panel of GoToMeeting, and I'll keep track of it while you're doing so. I'll take a few minutes to introduce Synerzip. Those of you who don't know us, it'll just take a couple minutes, and then we'll come back and take some of the questions that are broadly applicable to this topic. So while you're jotting your questions in the Q&A panel, let me talk about Synerzip for a minute. Synerzip is Synerzip in a nutshell, there are 5 points I'll cover here. So we are actually a software development partner for small to mid-sized technology companies. Typically venture-backed companies are our clients, but any small to mid-sized companies makes for a good client, and we have done work for about 60 odd clients, and I'll show those in a few minutes. Second thing is for each client, we put together a dedicated high caliber team of software professionals and essentially allow our clients to expand their R&D capability.
Hi Hemant, let me break you. Sorry about that. Have you shared your screen? Because I'm not seeing anything on my screen over yet.
Okay, let's make sure I am. So I changed presenter, right? So I am the presenter. I'm on the screen. Let's ask the audience. Anybody having any difficulty seeing the screen I'm going through? Okay, people are seeing it. So right, you may have a different window.
Okay.
Okay. So the second point I was saying was dedicated teams, high caliber team for each client that we put together, and it becomes essentially expands your in-house R&D team. Third point is because of our experience being in software development for a better part of 3 decades, we actually have a very good sense of balancing what I would call in software the appropriate level of engineering discipline. When you have to be rigorous about software development process, when you have to be agile and very quick and responsive. And in general, we feel agile practices are very flexible and effective in helping us allow that striking the right balance for our clients. And through that process, we are able to really help our clients reduce the risk of development in their unique situations in their world. And the fourth point about Synerzip is given our dual shore operation, we have a development center in India. In fact, Rohit is sitting in our development center presenting from Pune, India. So we have a good high performance team over there and a small product management kind of a team on the US side. And with that dual shore team, we are really able to provide our clients with a cost advantage, yet the simplicity of engagement, and reduce their cost by 50% that they would otherwise have to spend. And last point about Synerzip highlights is the flexibility that we provide to our clients. We are able to in fact, encourage and facilitate our clients whenever they feel like converting their team with Synerzip into their captive operation, they can do that, which really gives great long-term flexibility to all our clients. So those are Synerzip highlights in a nutshell, and we'd love to chat with any of you if you have more interest. And now let's talk about, let's show you this page, a glimpse of some of our clients. This is not an exhaustive list, but so you can recognize some of the names here, and it will give you a feel for the range of clients we serve across industries and across technologies. So with that, in the remaining 10 minutes or so, let's turn our attention back to the questions related to cross-enterprise, cross-platform mobile development. So Rohit, if you're ready, I'm going to pick a few questions that have come in from the audience and go over those questions.
Sure.
Okay. So the first question that's taken, let me just expand my window here so I can read the question fully. So the first question, I guess, is a multi-part question, but are these two platforms that you talked about, PhoneGap and Titanium, are they really ready for prime time? In the sense, can development teams feel safe about building code on top of it and making investment? Are these stable and mature enough, ready for doing real application development?
Yes. So Hemant, let me give some examples of who uses these platforms. There's a company called SlideShare, which is into syncing of files. That company itself is using PhoneGap extensively to churn out its Android client and iOS client. And the same company is now planning to churn out its BlackBerry and other clients also. So for PhoneGap, it is gathering a lot of momentum because that's a natural way of going ahead. With Titanium also, if you go and look at Titanium's client base, Sugar CRM or Sugar Sync is a company which is heavily using Titanium mobile as its platform. So just a glance at their website tell us about their current companies which are using them. And if you look at their developer forum and their community support, for both of them, there is a good enough community support right now. The risk is very low to go with both of these things.
Okay. Let's take a related question of then if right now the market shares are probably largest, at least at this point, who knows what happens next month, next quarter, but right now iOS and Android are probably the dominant mobile platforms at this point. Right? So given if a company is only focusing on those two, then what would be the recommendation for the platform to use, PhoneGap or not?
Well, I would bet on PhoneGap because PhoneGap is based on standards. And remember, HTML5 and CSS3 are really making a lot of sound right now. A lot of the companies, like companies behind iOS and companies behind Android, like Google and Apple, are investing heavily into support of HTML5 and CSS. I would always bet my money on a technology which is based on standards, then a technology which is based on some proprietary API or some proprietary methods of a particular company. So I would bet my money on PhoneGap for that right now.
Okay. Another question that comes up, and it is coming in different ways by different people, so let me kind of paraphrase that, which is the skill requirement and the learning curve for these two platforms for a team of developers. If the target development needs to be to run on iOS, BlackBerry, Android, these common mobile, but the team is going to use some combination of PhoneGap or Titanium and do all that, what kind of, for each of them, perhaps you can shed light on what is the skill profile required of a developer and what's the learning curve if you take a mainstream Java developer, perhaps?
Sure. So when you talk about Titanium, currently it only supports Android and iOS. That's the only two platforms it supports. Let me just clarify this. I'll go more towards PhoneGap in this case. So when you use PhoneGap, the development team will need to invest first couple of weeks or first week in just to set up the environment for all the platforms. Once the environment is set up, whatever they develop next is always cross-platform. They develop it once and it runs on all the platforms. And unlike when you do iOS development, you don't need to learn Objective-C. In this case, you just have to use your HTML and JavaScript skills. That is it. And there's enough examples of, every company has, like any company which has a web applications, will have developers who understand JavaScript. And JavaScript is, is anybody who knows any mainstream language also knows JavaScript right now. So the learning curve with PhoneGap is pretty less. The learning curve with Titanium is not as less as PhoneGap because the entire API of UI development is also proprietary. So in both the cases, it's definitely much more lower than going the native way.
Okay, great. Okay, let's take another one here. A couple of people have asked some alternative frameworks, so let me bring them up, see if you're familiar with them, Rohit, and can comment on that. One is MEAP, M-E-A-P, Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. Have you heard of it? How does that compare to PhoneGap and Titanium? And another one is, I think, Sencha Touch, S-E-N-C-H-A, Touch. Are you familiar with these? How do they compare? And let's take a general question. What else is out there?
Sure. The first one I'm not familiar with, but it looks like an enterprise solution. So it will be much bigger than just being a cross-platform mobile application development. The first one seems to be much more bigger with a complete backend support. The second one, yes, I've heard about it. It's called Sencha Touch. It is a JavaScript application UI development framework for mobile applications. So Sencha Touch is from a company called as EXE.js, which was predominantly a player for cross-browser application development. And now it has moved into the space of cross-mobile application UI development. So Sencha Touch can be used along with PhoneGap to give a good UI.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. Okay, someone just confirmed that MEAP is a bigger platform. It's from SAP Sybase. Okay, that's good clarification. Let's take another one. I think you mentioned somewhere in your presentation that WebKit would be the next virtual machine. So can you kind of build upon that and explain what do you mean by that?
Okay, this is my way of saying that because the platform because the OS for mobile platforms is very much fragmented. Like you got iOS, you got Android OS, you got webOS, a lot of these things. So what is the common part? What is one thing which is common across all these platforms? All these modern smartphones, all these OS, they support one thing in a common way, which is that they have web browsers which are very modern, and they can pretty much show anything. They can pretty much access any web applications. So you already have a common standard for browsers across all these platforms, and I'm trying to extend that. My idea is to extend that to make it an application development platform. Okay. So that's why I say that, because all this OS supports showing any kind of modern websites, Ajax websites, or Flash websites, or mostly Ajax websites. You can extend them to create mobile web applications. And this mobile web applications can be then augmented with native phone features. That is the whole idea over here.
Okay. Great. Let's take one more question. There are two more. Let's take this one, and then if we have time, we'll take another one. This sounds like a more general question, though, which is, what would be a realistic time frame to develop the first mobile app for either iPhone or Android, assuming it is a geosocial application, so you can kind of assume a certain scope of complexity of feature function. It's a geosocial application. Do you have any kind of, from your experience, Rohit, can you tell what would it take to build that first application if you did it native versus if you did it perhaps using PhoneGap or Titanium?
Okay. Here's my thinking on that. Now let's look at let's define some complexity for this application. Let's say you're building some application like Foursquare, which is both social, which is both geo. Right. And so you already have a web service which is running over there, and your application is more or less a client to that particular web service. Right. Now when I try to build the same application using Android, things get very complex because I'm going to call a RESTful API call and have screens in Android or have screens in iOS. So things will be much more complicated over here. But if I choose to go PhoneGap way, it's more or less I can use my existing HTML developer, web developer, to write the same code. So for such a thing, I would say a period of 2 months to 2.5 months time, with some scope for testing, would be a good thing to develop such application. But the same application being developed by native, that period could go till 4 months with 3 to 4 months with 2 teams. But in this case, it will be like 2.5 months with 1 team. Obviously, assuming that the scope and requirements are totally well defined.
Right. So, and would you clarify what do you mean by team in terms of what are we talking? 2 developer, 1 QA, very different. So, team size.
Team size. In case of Android, I will obviously go for so let's say 3 developers, 1 QA for both the teams, Android and iOS. And in this case, again 3 developers and one QA for going cross-platform. So basically, in all 6 developers, 2 QAs for iPhone and Android, and 3 developers and 1 QA for PhoneGap Pay.
Sounds good. Okay. I think we have consumed all the time we had. There are a number of more questions. So let me offer, like we always do to our audience here. For any further questions, we'll be more than happy. We'll get you, Rohit, on a call if you need to, and answer any specific questions that any of you may have. This is a great topic, and I thank you all for joining us today. And this is such a popular topic. We may do a encore version of this with additional content sometime in the next few months. So with that, let's wrap this up. And thanks again, Rohit, for making yourself available on India time zone to present this content. Excellent job. Thank you.